Hi there, it's Mark, and welcome back to Article Club, where we read, annotate, and discuss one great article every month on race, education, or culture. Welcome to April, everybody, and I'm excited that you're here. And the reason is that we have been focusing on this outstanding article called The Sunset by Lisa Bubert. It was originally published in Long Reads, and it's really poignant and outstanding. And what it is that it is a personal experience, a personal essay by Lisa Bubert of her experience working in a nursing home when she was a college student about 10 years ago. I highly encourage you to read it if you haven't done so. And if you like it, which I think that you will, I want to encourage you to sign up for our discussion. We are going to be talking about the article on Sunday, April 30th from 2 to 3:30 p.m. Pacific time over on Zoom. And you can sign up for the discussion by going to highlighter.cc/discussion. If you haven't done Article Club before, it's just a really thoughtful community of readers who really just like reading the best nonfiction. And a special thing's going to be happening on the 30th. Lisa is actually going to be there. Our author who wrote this piece is going to be there talking about her piece with us. So I highly encourage all of you, not just to read the article, but also to come on by and to sign up for the discussion. With that said, I want to just get right into the interview. I had the opportunity to speak with Lisa a couple of days ago, and she's just really amazing. We talked for a few minutes, and she just really got into the piece. And I won't go into everything that we talked about, but it was just really great to talk not just about her experience in the nursing home, but how she approached writing this piece. It wasn't something that was particularly easy for her, she says, to write. And it took some time to sort of figure out what was right. And so we talked about a whole lot of different topics. And one of my favorite things is just how working with the elderly is something that we know, like we like our grandparents in our society, but we do not like our elderly. And it was just really wonderful for her to be there to offer dignity to the people that she worked with. And she said a whole lot about how true dignity requires us to witness people in their fullness. And so I won't go too much more, but I wanted to share that. She's just a wonderful person, and I hope that you enjoy this interview. Here it is. Hi, Lisa. Thank you so much for doing Article Club.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited.
Your piece is wonderful. It's so well written, so beautiful, and just wanted to talk to you about it. It's called The Sunset. You wrote it not too long ago, but it's a piece from 10 years ago or so, right?
Yes, so it covers a part of my life from about 10, 15 years ago at this point when I was working in a nursing home as a young college student. And then it jumps ahead to just right at the start of the pandemic when we lost my grandmother. And so the essay also focuses on that. But yeah, it kind of spans the time of the past decade up until present.
My first question is about why did you decide to write it now? Is it because of the pandemic? Why sort of now?
I have been trying to write about my experiences working in the nursing home for years, and I just I couldn't figure out the right way into that. I would try to start something and it just wouldn't take, it just didn't feel right. And the same, when her name is Granny K in the essay. When my first grandmother passed away, I went through a period where I was trying to write about that experience as well. And I, wrote around it a lot. But again, I just couldn't figure out how to really encapsulate it. And then when my granny Nawara passed away at the beginning of the pandemic, that was another thing where I wanted to write about this and I was trying to find a way in and I couldn't. And one thing that I have learned that I repeat to people a lot when I, teach classes or I work with people who are writing their own essays, personal essays about really tough, traumatic stuff, is that sometimes you are just still too close to what has happened to be able to really distill it down and to be able to write about it with both the distance you need, but also without with both distance that you need, but also the ability to like dig in to those really hard things. It's interesting because an article that deals with such difficult memories and things that bring up traumatic memories or really upsetting, like grieving times like that, you have to have enough distance to see how it relates to the large scale of your life, but you also still have to be close enough to that pain that you can, really access it and be able to talk about it clearly. And one thing I find, people who are trying to write personal essays, trying to get out some really painful topics, a lot of times I see that they're too close to their topic still, and they're protecting themselves when they're writing by staying distant from it in a way. And yeah, so I guess that's a long a long way of saying that, like, I have been trying to write this essay ever since I started working at that nursing home, but I finally had found the right way in when Granny Wire passed away, and I had time in the pandemic to just really process everything that was going on.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because even at the beginning of the piece, I didn't quite know exactly how much longer or how much later it was, but it seemed like you took care of this 19-year-old college student in some ways. Like it seems like you're a little bit like, hey, I'm just going to try it. I mean, do you remember that time when you said, oh, I'm going to try this job?
Yes, somewhere my mother is laughing. I went to college for music first. I went to college as a French horn player to play, I studied music performance. And after the first year of that, I was like, that is not what I thought it would be. I didn't want to do that anymore. And I was so lost in my second year of college. I knew I didn't want to play music, but I didn't really have any plans other than that. And my mother is a nurse. She's always, for as long as I could remember, she's been working in the medical field and surgery and nursing. And I thought, well, I'd like to go into the medical field. I'll try that. That's something that I'm familiar with. And so that was my thought, was all right, I'm going to start taking all these science classes, which, by the way, I'm terrible at science. Like, chemistry was a bloodbath when it came to grades. It was terrible. It was not a good year for me in college. I actually flunked out that year. So that should have been a sign that maybe science and medical field isn't for me. But so that was the thought. When I applied for that job, I was like, I want to get a job working in some kind of medical field. My mother had told me, like, well, why don't you try starting with a certified nursing assistant certification, because that's kind of like the entryway, and then you can just, you're doing things like caring for people, taking their vitals, blood pressures, things like that. You learn the basics of first aid and care, and that interested me. So, and like I say in the essay, that was the place I applied to, and they were so hungry for work. They were like, yep, come on, you 19-year-old college kid.
Yeah, they gave you the job, and later in the piece you say, well, if anybody wants to get a job, you can get a job, especially with the turnover.
Pretty much. And I think I'm almost positive that that's still the case right now. The turnover is just so high. They're hungry for just people who will do the work of the caregiving.
Yeah, the guy at the beginning, he said something. He said, treat each resident like they're your grandmama. And I just write like that's in the first paragraph. And it seemed like you did through the piece.
I mean, I tried to, and I want to make it clear, and I feel like I try to make this clear in the piece, that because I was so young, and because I was small, and honestly because I was white, I was usually assigned easier shifts. I mean, the hall that I worked in was, I mean, I would get assigned to different halls, but the hall that I usually worked on was the hall that was the easiest one. It was where the elderly residents were, mostly independent. They were mostly lucid. They didn't need, full care. They didn't need two people to help them up and get them into their chair. They didn't need to be, spoon fed. They didn't need to help assistance with showering and hygiene and anything like that. And so to that end, it was easy for me to treat, to have that in my head all the time, treat them like like your grandmother. But I mean, there were other halls where that was really difficult to do, because there were people that needed full total assistance. They would need to be bathed in bed. They would need to be, transferred, two nurses or two CNAs have to, transfer them to their chairs to go to the restroom, or, they would need to be changed in bed. They need their bed sheets. I mean, just the sheer amount of physical work that has to be done in order to do that. It's just impossible. And I mean, I think I said in the essay, it's just an impossible task. And so it's like you'll go in with the idea of like, okay, like, these are human beings. these are vulnerable people. I want to treat them like my grandparents. Like, you go in having empathy, but then the work is so difficult and there just are not enough people and the pay is so low that it's hard to just it's hard to keep that empathy at the forefront. And I don't want to even say that people that are like at their max in these jobs don't have empathy, because they absolutely do. They absolutely have the utmost empathy, but they just don't have the support. So it yeah, it's really difficult to do that job and still provide the care that you would want to provide if it were your own grandparent. I mean, you can do your most in that job and it still will not it will not be what you want for any of your loved ones.
I appreciate that you mentioned race, not just here, but also several times in the piece. I picked up on it, in the first page or two, but then you bring it back too. Can you say a little bit more about also halls 3 and 4, how you were placed in hall 7, maybe how like you didn't talk about like how you experienced being a coworker of some of your peers. It seems like you really are thinking about race in this piece, even though it's about all these other things. Can you say more about why?
Yeah, I mean, it was something. I mean, at the time when I was in it, of course I was too young, and honestly just I hadn't been out in the wider world enough to really, like, see what I was seeing. It was only until I'm older. I live in a, much more diverse, historically Black city now, and, doing a lot of work of, anti-racist learning and whatnot. And then when I look at back on the experiences I've had in work, it's like I can look back and clearly see, like, oh yes, there was a division there. I mean, I was the only coworker that I can remember, or the only CNA that was working there that I can remember, that was a single unmarried college student. There were single mothers, there were, married mothers, there were older women with grown children, but for the most part, everybody was, older. They had children at home that they were caring for, and the majority of the workers were Black women. And that's just what it was. That's just what the majority of the coworkers were. And again, because I'm just a young college student who, I had had a lot of hard work in my life or whatever, but just kind of walking into the job, I can totally understand that somebody would look at me and say, well, she's not going to be able to lift, she's not going to, be able to handle this, we have to go, we have to boom boom boom, like, I don't have time to explain it to you, all that kind of stuff. And I can see, why the head nurse, thought it would make more sense to assign me to an easier hall, and why other coworkers get assigned to these more difficult halls. But I mean, to, you know, I don't think you can ignore the racial dynamic of where people were assigned and why. Nobody wants to say like it's because of race or anything like that. But I think you have to look at the systemic reason as to why majority of workers that are working low wage jobs are people of color.
Yeah. And later in the essay, you talk very deeply and beautifully about dying and how dying is for the vulnerable. It's the most vulnerable act that we have. And also, like, this idea of witness and the idea of like seeing somebody and being there with them, as they die. And just what you just said about who is actually doing the work, meaning Black women doing the work. I guess one of the big questions that I had is, do you see any other way through for white America and how we feel about older people and death and dying?
I mean, there has to be. And I'm trying to really think about my words. When it comes down to it, what needs to happen in every situation to make, every area of our society that is really lacking, where there is not enough attention and there's not enough care, is the fact that there's just simply not enough resources to go around. And when I say resources, I mean money. There is not enough tax dollars going to elder care in general. Elder care is not something that a lot of people who go into the medical field want to work with. The people who are working in elder care sometimes it can be seen as a job of a last resort, or it's a temporary, it's just, I'm doing this temporarily until I move on to the next thing. And that's not, again, that's not to say that's because people working in these fields don't have the utmost empathy for it, but it's because the jobs are low paid. They are not very well regulated. It's just really difficult to get and retain really great workers in these areas because of the pay, because of the way the resources are allocated and everything like that. And and the thing is that no one is going to advocate for a vulnerable person more than, nobody's going to advocate for a vulnerable person more strongly than that vulnerable person's family or loved ones. So of course it's easy for me to go sit with my grandmother for 3 days while she's dying. It's easier for me to go visit my other grandmother every week. And of course that got harder because it was sad. And I think when I look back at that time in the nursing home, the people who got, I don't want to say the best care, but did have like the most support were the people whose families were checking in. They had families visiting all the time. They had families checking in with the nurses. They were always checking in on the care. And the ones that really kind of got the short end of the stick were people who didn't have a lot of outside advocacy for them. And and the thing is that, I mean, we're about to enter a period where boomers are going to be aging into their own elder care systems. And there's still going to be a lot of people that are not necessarily going to have that familial friend support. And I feel like I'm going down a sad depressing path. But I mean, I guess if we want to say that the way through is to you have to really think about the loved ones in your lives that are getting into that elderly age. And you have to even just simple things like visiting, writing letters, calling, going to visit, advocating for them at the nurses station, doing all of these things. Those are so very important, because not only does it make the person who is in the care, remind them that they are loved, and that they haven't been forgotten, and that they are wanted, but it also, sends a signal to the care facility, like, this is a person that has a support group around them that, that care for them. And again, that's not to say that the care facility wouldn't care for that person, or wouldn't try to care for that person well otherwise, but it's very heartening for CNAs and nurses who work in these facilities to see family members coming in and visiting their people, because it makes you feel like you're not having to carry it all by yourself.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I appreciate that so much. And also, it's in your piece too. Like, there's obviously a lot of injustice in your piece. There's a lot of sadness in your piece, but there's also a ton of humor, and just a lot of humanity, obviously. And one of them is, we have to remember our sunsets too with our Granny Caves. That was such. I just want to ask you how you wrote that paragraph, or that passage. Because it's an essay that has the different pieces, you also have to decide when to put it in. Can you just talk a little bit about that scene? It's just so beautiful.
Oh, thank you. I think about that. I think about that sunset a lot. Honestly, I remember when it was happening. It was seared into my brain. Yeah, I feel like there are moments, in our lives where we know that something is happening in that moment that we're going to remember forever. Sometimes it's obvious. You're walking down the aisle to your spouse that you're going to marry, or you're watching, a loved one pass away in a hospital bed, or but sometimes there are these tiny little moments, like, I'm driving my grandmother to our Christmas dinner, and she is really watching this sunset. And just the way she sat up, I just, it was just a moment where, I could just feel it. I was like, this is something that I'm going to remember the rest of my life. And that's what I feel like a lot of my, I mean, really all of my essays, and especially this piece is a collection of those moments. When I'm working in the home, the the lady who would wear all the jewelry, and we would eat chocolates and talk about boys. I remember sitting next to her and having that moment and thinking, like, this is something I'm going to remember forever, because this is such a lovely moment. Or, you know, helping the other lady who, I mean, she really couldn't remember shit. When I say she doesn't remember shit, she really didn't remember shit, but she just was laughing and she was so happy, and poor thing didn't have any teeth. And so we would just, we'd all sit at the table and laugh together. And it's just, so yeah, I think when I look at all the disparate pieces of that essay, I mentioned earlier that this is something that I had taken, like, over the course of 10 or more years to kind of cobble together. And it is cobbled together of moments where I just had a moment where I'm like, I'm going to remember this forever, because this right here, like, this is what it's all about. So yeah, I don't know if that helps answer the question of how I wrote it, but a lot of how I write is by feel anyway. And it just kind of felt like that was the correct time to put that moment in. And one thing I talked about with the editor of the piece, his name is Peter Rubin, and he's editor with Long Reads and Automatic, and he's wonderful. I love Peter. We actually had a discussion about, he really wanted the sunset paragraph with Granny K to be the last. He's like, that's the end. You should, that's where you should end it. And I really wanted it to end on the scene, the smoking scene, where I'm in with all of our older residents, and we're smoking and they're having a good time. And we did go back and forth, and I really like hung true. I was like, I really want that smoking scene to be the final one, because it's light, it's hopeful, it's not like so final. The sunset paragraph, it's beautiful and it is very final. It is very final, but I mean, life is never final. It just goes on day after day, and some days are good and some days are bad, and next day, tomorrow will always come. So that's really why I wanted to end it there, and how I kind of navigated by the feel of, like, this is a great moment, and it does belong towards the end, but it doesn't belong right at the end.
Yeah. That's amazing, because I was going to ask you about the smoking scene too, because when I was reading along and you came back to the sunset after your grandma Narara passed away, I was like, okay, it's the end. And then I was like, oh, there's a whole other scene. And the first time I read it, I was like, why is this funny scene here at the end? And then after I thought about it, it was exactly what you just said. Not just the lightness and not just like that like we all go on, but also I felt like you were trying to make a statement there as well. Also, because I think the piece is not necessary. I thought it was going to be about Granny K, but I feel like it's the time from when you were 19 to now, and also like what you've learned. And that last scene is absolutely hilarious.
It was, oh gosh, I really would volunteer for it every time, because I did look forward to it, because they would get in there and we'd light up their little cigarettes, and they'd just be like yelling across the room at each other, and there'd be laughter, and half of them, don't even know what's going on anymore anyway, but they're just, I don't know, it was a muscle memory of picking up a cigarette and inhaling it, and just feeling like, I have all the time in the world. I'm just going to sit here and smoke this cigarette, and just have fun. And I don't know, humor is very important to me. It's the only way that I can find to get through this world, pretty much. I'm glad you found it funny, because I really like to try to end with some levity, because especially when you've had a piece that can be really, really hard to take in. I mean, that's all of life. Life is really hard to take in, but life also has, like, I don't know, life is hilarious sometimes. It's just funny.
It totally is. Yeah. And also, though, okay, so it got me thinking that you talk about vulnerability and also witness and specifically dignity. And so you have dignity in all of these very deep ways. But then right at the end with the smoking scene, you are dignifying them for basically, they're having the time of their lives. They're killing themselves, but they're already dying. You know what I mean? With the
Yeah,
whole
no,
thing.
thank you.
But ultimately you're seeing them. You are seeing them in the moment of who they are as real people who might be thinking about their younger times, or they might just be enjoying having the nicotine right then and there. I just thought it was really beautiful.
Yes, I'm glad you kind of put the idea of dignity and witness together, because that I had that nursing home job. That was my first care job. We talked briefly right before we started interviewing about, I work as a librarian in Nashville, and I work at a branch that sees a lot of unhoused patrons, a lot of unhoused people, a lot of people who are struggling with mental illness, people who are struggling with substance abuse, who are, just trying to like get through their day with as little friction as possible in a life where there is just a lot of friction. Every day is friction. And, the number one thing that we have learned at that branch is, it's not just to be kind. It's not just to like, help them, as much as you can, help them with whatever they need to accomplish at the library as much as you can. The biggest part of my job and how, we get through that job, having relationships with people is that idea of witness. A lot of people, just the fact that you look at them and you say hello, somebody who walks in that's clearly unhoused, that hasn't, been able to get to a shower in a while, that has all of their bags, everything that they own with them in hands. They walk into a building already thinking like, I'm not wanted here. I don't belong here. Somebody's going to say something to me. They're already coming in with those defenses up. So just the fact of looking at them, saying hello, asking how their day is, um, getting their name, remembering their name, shaking their hand, that is like, that just is the job. And that is what gets them through sometimes when there's a really hard day. Yesterday, actually, I had a patron that came in that he had lost his phone. Somebody had stolen his phone, whatever. We had gone, we went through that. We couldn't find his phone. And then he just kind of hung back for a little bit, like he had something he wanted to say. And I was, I was kind of like, oh, well, what is it? He said, I write poetry. And he's like, and I really wanted to share the poem with somebody. And he just was kind of like, he was scared to like really say anything more. And I was like, well, I'll read it. And he was like, you will? And I was like, yeah, I'll read it. And he gave it to me. And it was this beautiful little poem about just all the difficult stuff that we've been dealing with in our city of Nashville lately, just all of the unrest, and the wondering why things are happening the way they're happening, and all of that stuff. And it was just this beautiful little poem about loving your neighbor, and having consideration for others, and treating people with dignity. And just the fact that I read the poem, said I loved it, I made him sign it, he said I could keep it. It was wonderful. And that, like, it didn't matter that one was missing anymore. I mean, obviously it does matter, but he walked away lighter than when he came in. And like, how easy is that to just like tell somebody hello, shake their hand, get their name, meet them where they are and what they need. It's so simple. And that's how you afford people dignity. Just witness them as they are, and you just accept them where they're at.
It's so beautiful. You say how easy and simple it is, but it is not for a lot of people. And I just met you, and obviously just read the piece, and the beauty of the piece, comes through. And then now just talking to you for 20 to 25 minutes, just really appreciating who you are and what you bring, and like that you're also saying yes to coming to our discussion in a few weeks.
I just really appreciate it. I appreciate that you asked me to do the podcast. I appreciate that you asked me to come to the group. I'm very much looking forward to it. And I'm so thankful that you have kept this up for as long as you have, and will hopefully continue long into the future as well.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Thank you so much for this and also your piece, and looking forward to talking to you again in a couple weeks.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
I want to thank Lisa Bubert once more for writing the piece, obviously, but also for coming onto Article Club to share her thoughts about her outstanding essay, The Sunset, and also for saying yes. She's going to be coming to our discussion on April 30th from 2 to 3:30 p.m. And I really would like to encourage you to join and to sign up. And so if you are interested, yet again, all you need to do is go to highlighter.cc/discussion and sign up, and then I'll email you all the information, including the Zoom link. If you are a first timer, please just get all your questions asked, and I'll make sure to answer all of them, because I do understand, like, for the first time to doing anything, there might be a little bit of trepidation and nervousness. And I just want to assure you that we are just, a good, kind, thoughtful group of folks from across the country who just really care about the best nonfiction. So I hope that you give it a try. If you have any questions, you can also email me at mark@highlighter.cc. Anyway, thank you again for listening to this interview with Lisa Bubert, and thank you for all your support of Article Club, and hope you have a good weekend.